Imagine it is the 14th of March, 2019. You're a 28-year-old graphic designer living in Austin, Texas. You have a steady job. You make about $62,000 a year. Not rich, but not struggling either. You have been careful. You have saved for 3 years. You have a down payment fund sitting in your bank account, $22,000. And you are finally ready to stop renting, ready to buy something that is yours. You have done the math on a spreadsheet. You have driven past the neighborhoods. You have picked out the street, a small house, 3 bedrooms, a yard with a cedar tree in the back. The asking price is $240,000. Tight, but doable. Your parents bought their first home at your age for $80,000. Your grandparents bought theirs for $30,000. This is supposed to be the next chapter of your life. If you have ever stood at that exact door, calculator in hand, hope in chest, and watched it slam shut, stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not a theory. It is not a political opinion. It is a pattern. It is repeated across at least 5 countries in the last 100 years. And each time it played out, the people inside it believed it was unique to their moment. It was not. History has a script for this. And if you find value in that kind of clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. Now here is what happened next. You go back to that spreadsheet in the summer of 2021. The same house, or one almost identical on the same street, is now listed at $390,000. You have not changed. Your savings have not dramatically changed, but the number on the sign has grown by 62% in 2 years. By 2022, it crosses $430,000. Your down payment, once a proud 20%, is now barely 11%. The mortgage payment you could afford in 2019 now buys you a property an hour outside the city. The cedar tree in the yard is still there. You just are not allowed in the yard anymore. This video is about why that happened. Not just in Austin, not just in America. Why an entire generation across multiple wealthy countries has found itself locked outside the housing market at exactly the moment in their lives when every generation before them walked in. This is a story about how wealth gets transferred between generations through the mechanism of housing. It is about who designed the machine, even if unintentionally, and it is about what history shows happens next. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. The housing market is not like other markets. When the price of eggs doubles, people buy fewer eggs. When the price of televisions falls, people buy more televisions. That is normal supply and demand. The basic idea that when something gets more expensive, people want less of it. Housing does not work this way. And understanding why is the key that unlocks this entire story. Housing is what economists call a dual nature asset. An asset is something you own that holds or grows in value. Housing is both a place to live and a financial investment at the same time. When prices rise, the people who already own homes do not sell. They hold tighter because their wealth is rising. Meanwhile, the people who want to buy face prices, they cannot reach. So rising prices do not clear the market the way they do with eggs or televisions. Rising prices lock people out while locking others in. The longer prices rise, the wider that gap becomes. Think of it like a ladder nailed to the side of a building. Every generation is supposed to climb the first few rungs and eventually reach the roof. But imagine someone quietly raises the entire ladder 6 feet off the ground, while a generation is still saving up to grab the bottom rung. The ladder is still there. The roof is still there. The mechanism still exists, but the entry point has moved beyond reach. And the people already on the ladder, they do not even notice, because from their position, everything looks exactly the same. This brings us directly to the first case study. And it takes us back further than most people expect. In the late 1980s, Japan was the envy of the world. The Japanese economy had been growing for 4 consecutive decades. Tokyo was the most expensive city on earth. Japanese corporations were buying American landmarks. Rockefeller Center in New York was purchased by a Japanese real estate company in 1989 for $846 million. Japanese land prices had become so inflated that, at the peak in 1991, the assessed value of all property in Tokyo was greater than the assessed value of all property in the entire United States. Let that settle. One city, greater than one entire country. Young Japanese workers in their late 20s and 30s were told this was normal. That land was precious because Japan was small, that prices only went in one direction, that renting was for people who lacked ambition. Banks offered 30-year mortgages, then 50-year mortgages, then, extraordinarily, 100-year mortgages, meaning you would borrow money your grandchildren repay. This was called a generational mortgage. It was normalized, it was encouraged, it was presented as the only realistic path. What happened next defines Japan's next 30 years. The Bank of Japan raised interest rates in 1989 to cool the inflation. Interest rates are the price of borrowing money. When they go up, mortgage payments go up, and fewer people can afford to buy. Property prices began to fall, then they fell harder, then they collapsed. Between 1991 and 2005, urban land prices fell by roughly 70%. That 100-year mortgage your parents took out was now on a house worth a fraction of what they paid. The term for this is negative equity, meaning you owe the bank more money than your house is actually worth. Millions of Japanese families spent the 1990s in this position. The generation born in the 1960s and 1970s, the ones who stretched to buy at the peak, were financially paralyzed for decades. They could not sell, they could not move, they could not retire early. Meanwhile, the younger generation who never got in, the ones priced out, faced a different problem. The crash destroyed confidence so completely that even as prices fell back to affordable levels, almost no one would buy. The economy froze. Japan called this their lost decade. Then it became 2 lost decades. The psychological scar of the bubble left an entire generation suspicious of home ownership, suspicious of debt, suspicious of the future. A 28-year-old in Tokyo in 1995 was no better off than a 28-year-old in 1989. They had simply traded being priced out for being traumatized. This leads to the second part of this story. And for this one, we go to a country that was once considered a model of prosperity. Here's something I want you to think about before we go further. We have talked about Japan and wrong moments. What is actually worse, being priced out of a market that eventually crashes, or being let in at the wrong time with debt? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously, because what I am about to show you next is the part most people never hear. And it changes everything about how we think about who wins and who loses in a housing crisis. Ireland in the early 2000s was a country that had genuinely transformed. In 1987, it was one of the poorest nations in Western Europe, with unemployment above 17% and young people leaving in waves. By 2005, it was called the Celtic Tiger, a phrase meant to compare its explosive growth to East Asian tiger economies. GDP growth was running at around 6%. Dublin had trendy restaurants and boutique hotels and a skyline filling with cranes. The average house price in 1994 was $70,000. By 2006, it had risen to over €360,000, an increase of more than 500%. Young Irish workers in their late 20s were being told they needed to get in now or be left behind forever. The phrase used constantly was that property only ever goes up. Banks were offering 100% mortgages, no down payment. They were offering 110% mortgages, giving buyers extra cash on top of the purchase price. The logic was simple. The house would be worth more in 5 years, so the extra debt was irrelevant. The 2008 global financial crisis hit Ireland like a freight train. Between 2007 and 2012, house prices fell by 55%. In some counties, it exceeded 60%. A generation who borrowed at peak prices now found themselves holding underwater mortgages. They owed €300,000 on houses worth $80,000 or $90,000. By 2013, Ireland had high rates of mortgage distress. Estimates suggested over 100,000 households were in serious trouble. Here is the detail history textbooks omit. The people most devastated were not wealthy speculators. They were ordinary first-time buyers aged 25 to 35, teachers, nurses, tradespeople, people who worked hard, saved carefully, and then borrowed as much as the bank would give them, because that was the only way in. The ladder was there. They grabbed the rung, and the ladder broke. Observe what both cases have in common. In Japan, a generation was priced out, then watched the crash and remained locked out. In Ireland, a generation was invited in just before the collapse, and then trapped by debt that exceeded the value of their homes. Different countries, different decades, identical outcome for ordinary people in their late 20s and 30s, locked out or locked in. Both groups lost their window. Now here's where it gets interesting, because we have not yet touched the mechanism most relevant today. And for this one, we go to Canada. Canada avoided the worst of the 2008 financial crisis. Its banks stayed solvent. For a decade after the global crash, Canada was held up internationally as an example of responsible economic management. And throughout that decade, while many countries were watching their housing markets correct, Canada's kept rising. Steadily, then sharply, then almost vertically. In Vancouver in 2005, the average house price was $350,000. By 2016, it had crossed $1.5 million. In Toronto, the average detached home went over $1 million. Reasons included foreign investment, low interest rates, and restrictive zoning laws that prevented new construction. Young Canadians began to face something that had no precedent in history. In the 1970s, a house cost 3 times annual income. By 2022, that ratio had climbed to between 12 and 15 times. The math does not work. If your grandparents earned $40,000, they bought for $120,000. Today, it costs over $1 million. It is not that people are spending less. It is that the ratio itself has been broken. Most people will never know what you now know. They assume it is natural. They assume it is temporary. They will not recognize the pattern repeated across multiple countries. If you are still here, You are not most people. Hit subscribe, because the next section is the part this channel was made for. At the heart of every one of these stories is the same mechanism. After World War II, governments made a deliberate policy decision. They decided to build wealth for the middle class through home ownership. The GI Bill subsidized mortgages for returning soldiers. In the UK, the government built public housing and then, under Thatcher, sold those homes to tenants via right to buy. In Australia and Canada, post-war immigration and expansion created the same dynamic. Home ownership was subsidized and prioritized. For about 30 years, this worked. The homes appreciated modestly in line with wages. The latter was accessible. The break came in the 1980s. Two forces arrived. The first was the global decline of interest rates. As inflation fell, interest rates came down. Lower rates mean cheaper mortgages. Buyers borrow more, sellers charge more. Every reduction in interest rates was captured not by buyers, but by higher prices. The benefit vanished into the price tag. The second force was land use policy. Zoning laws became increasingly restrictive in most wealthy cities from the 1970s onward. Single-family zoning prevented cities from building densely. Existing homeowners largely supported these restrictions. More houses would mean more supply. More supply would moderate prices. Moderate prices would slow their own wealth growth. Existing homeowners had every reason to oppose the thing that would make housing affordable for those who did not own yet. This is the core structure. Easy credit plus restricted supply plus the belief that prices only rise equals an inaccessible market. The human cost is high. The people hit hardest were the ones in the middle, the ones who did everything right. In the United Kingdom, ownership for young adults fell from 67% to 38% in one generation. In Australia, the rate fell from 60% to 40%. They simply could not reach the first rung. Delayed ownership correlated with delayed marriage and childbearing, a generation quietly recalibrating its life sequence by necessity. Contrast this with those inside. The Fed's decision to hold rates near zero produced an extraordinary transfer of wealth. A median American home worth $166K in 2012 became worth $370K by 2022, a gain of $200,000 for owning, not for working, for owning. Meanwhile, those locked out spent a decade paying rent and building no equity. In the UK, homeowners over 60 held trillions in wealth, more than the GDP of most countries. The question is not whether this pattern repeats. History has answered that. The question is if you see it clearly. What did the successful people have in common? The record shows they did not stretch to their absolute borrowing limit. Those who resisted the pressure to maximize their mortgage had options when the crash came. They maintained financial breathing room. The sharpest pain was in places with the sharpest rises. Remote commuter towns suffered the steepest corrections. Survivors also had sources of stability not tied to one asset class. Home ownership works when it is one part of a broad financial life. Every individual's situation is different, but the pattern is consistent. We return to Sarah in Austin, the graphic designer. She is not a failure. She made no mistakes. She did exactly what the script said, and the script changed around her. Housing crises are trust events. They erode confidence in the basic operating contract of the society they live in. This erosion reshapes behavior, family formation, and civic participation for an entire generation. It is a structural wound. Understanding the mechanism changes the question. It is about the shape of the cycle and what the record shows comes next. This is historical analysis, not financial advice. If someone needs to understand the shape of what they are inside, share this. Subscribe.